On February 24th, 2022, President Putin launched his invasion of Ukraine. President Putin believed that Russian forces would capture Kiev within 48 hours. In fact, evidence proves that Russian officers and soldiers alike both thought the war would only last about 5 days. After all, it was a special military operation. But as we all know, their dream of a quick war was completely obliterated with the Kiev offensive, which turned to an absolute Russian military disaster. And now 5 months later, the war is still going on and still raging, and neither Ukraine or Russia are showing any signs of peace agreements. Putin is still keen on capturing Ukraine, and Ukraine is still keen on keeping their full territorial sovereignty. Some intelligence officials have suggested the war could last up to 2 years. And with this new information, it has caused many people to speculate who will actually win this war, Russia or Ukraine. Before we answer this question, we must remember one thing. Wars are very unpredictable because war is a game of strategy, and whoever can win the strategic game ends up winning the war. With that being said, the tide of war has changed multiple times during the Russo-Ukrainian War, and within the first phase of the war, Ukraine was absolutely decimating Russian soldiers, and then in the second phase of the war, during the Battle of Donbass, Russian forces were winning and they ended up taking the entire Luhansk Oblast. However, their offensive has completely stalled at Seversk, and their gains seem to be very minimal, if any. Also, with Ukrainian forces making serious advances in the Kherson region, the tide could turn again and make it seem as if Ukraine is winning the war. With that being said, the tide of the war during the early stages of war rarely are a solid prediction of how the war will be in the future. There are plenty of examples of this. Take World War II for instance. Hitler's war machine stormed over Poland, obliterated the French, took France over, and forced the British to leave Dunkirk. However, towards the end of the war, especially after Operation Barbarossa, the tide completely turned, and then the Allies began to win and destroy the Nazi war machine. Another example of this, we go back a couple hundred years, is the American Revolution. In the beginning of the war, the British military was absolutely dominating and the Americans seemed to be losing, but in the end, through attritional warfare and the help of allies, the Americans ended up winning. And that brings us to our point. The war in Ukraine is likely going to be a war of attrition. At the beginning of the war, we saw major battles such as the Battle of Kiev, the Battle of Sumy, the Battle of Kharkiv, and the Russian Eastern Offensive. But these battles and the casualties that came with them have severely battered both sides and worn both sides down. During the Battle of Donbass, the Russians took the entire Luhansk Oblast, but that came at a massive amount of casualties. In fact, during the Eastern Ukraine offensive, it is estimated that 10 to 15,000 Russian soldiers were killed and over 25,000 were wounded. On the Ukrainian side, it's estimated that 10 to 11,000 Ukrainian soldiers were killed and around 20,000 were wounded. These are massive casualties on both sides, and both the Russian army and the Ukrainian army in Eastern Ukraine have taken severe losses and are seriously battered. With that being said, Russia's offensive in Donbass has stalled, and this has turned into a grinding war of attrition. In a war of attrition, usually the person who sticks in the fight the longest ends up winning. A great example of this is the Vietnam War. In the end, the Viet Cong won, and a major reason why they won is because in the grand scheme of things, in the war of attrition, they were willing to fight longer than the American public, the American government was willing to fight. Therefore, they won the war. The same thing goes for the war in Afghanistan. The war in Afghanistan lasted for almost 20 years, and multiple countries such as the United States, the United Kingdom, and France all contributed troops to this war. The American military had the muscle, it had the power to absolutely destroy the Taliban. However, in the war of attrition, the American politicians were not willing to continue the fight in Afghanistan. At the end of this 19-year conflict, the Taliban ended up winning. There are plenty of examples all throughout history in which in attritional warfare, the one who sticks in the longest ends up winning, even if they are being beat. So in the Russo-Ukrainian War, the same thing applies. Whichever side is willing to stick in the longest, that side will end up being the victor. If you enjoy this video, be sure to subscribe to our channel so you can get the latest news on what's going on in your world without the bias of modern media. As usual, be sure to share this video with somebody else. God bless, and I'll catch you next time.